2nd, 2023. Okay, start over. Welcome to the May 22nd, 2023 meeting of the Agricultural Innovation Board. I guess maybe what we ought to do, there are no board members in the room except for Morgan and myself. Well, why don't we start with, Morgan, why don't you call out the board members who are on the call, and we'll do that first, and then we'll go ahead and get everybody else to introduce themselves.
Can do. So the first one I see is Claris.
Hi there, this is Claris with DEC.
Thank you, Claris. Sarah?
Hi, Sarah at the health department. Sorry, I'm not in person today.
Fine, thanks. Ryan?
Hey, it's Ryan Rebozo with the Vermont Center for Eco Studies.
And Wendy Sue?
Wendy Sue Harper, representing the soil biology position.
That's all I have online for members. So let's go to some guests. Jonathan Wook.
Hi, everyone. This is Jonathan Wolf with Primer Piper, listening in on behalf of Biotechnology Innovation Organization and Crop Life America.
Great. How about Lucas Rhodes?
Hi all, my name is Lucas Rhodes, listening on behalf of the Natural Resources Defense Council.
And Fred Putnam.
Hi there.
So you just put out Fred.
Fred Putnam, Vermont Beekeepers Association.
Thank you, Fred. And then Jean, we are our invited guest today, but you can introduce yourself.
Hey, Morgan. Thanks for having me. I'm Gene Harrington with Biotechnology Innovation Organization. Happy to be here virtually.
Okay, and then why don't we go around the room? We'll start with my stuff here.
Clark Parmalee. I'm a field agent with the Vermont Agency of Ag.
Jill Shafo-Goss. I'm an agricultural specialist with the Agency of Ag.
Stephanie Smith with the Agency of Agriculture, Deputy Director.
Brooke Decker with the Agency of Ag, Pollinator Health Specialist.
Dave Huber, Deputy Director with the Agency of Agriculture.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. We have the agenda, which Morgan posted on, sent to everybody and posted last week. Today we're going to have a farm activities update. Then Gene's going to talk to us about the relevant state legislation on this issue in other states. Jill will give us a review of the research on minimizing dust from planting operations. And then is Heather going to be able to join us today?
Yeah, so she's going to call in hopefully just during that 2 to 3 hour.
Okay, so Heather Darby will give us an update too on her research. And then we'll talk about the work plan and future meetings. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started with farm activities update? And Stephanie, you want to go first since you're going to have to sneak out?
Oh, yeah. I actually don't have any updates for the group today.
Okay.
I think I'm stealing. Right?
Yes, Morgan's going to steal my update about the agricultural input survey and where we are with that.
Okay, so there you go, Morgan.
Yep. So at our last meeting, we talked about another approach to try and increase our participation in the survey. We had sent it out and got 49 responses previously. So we accepted the proposal to have Anson, the Secretary of Agriculture here, send out a note to kind of the organizers of certain organizations. So maybe it could have been the communication specialist or the president or vice president of the association, and then Anson personally asking them for their help disseminating the survey among their organizations. And if they said, yes, happy to help, then they got the survey link. So Anson was very kind and sent that email for us on the 10th of May. And we got responses back from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Probably about half of the people that we sent it to. So we sent the link to 8 of the organizations, and basically anywhere between the 10th and the 12th we did that. We've asked for the deadline to fill out the survey to be June 16th. So far, we've had 4 additional responses to the survey. So that's where we're at on our kind of round 2.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the survey? Board members on the call. And Laura DePetro has joined us, it looks like. Laura, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Hi. I can only be here for an hour, though.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks for joining. Okay, so that's it for,
More.
well, yeah,
Yeah,
I just want to check with Stephanie.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dave, activities update?
Hi, everybody. I brought a whole bunch of rule books for the pesticide rule. We have these now in booklet form. Next AIB meeting that we have, any board members who show up in person, more than happy to give a copy of our rule booklet for easy reference on the rule. We're also at a point right now in the hiring process for a 5th field agent where we've received applications. The deadline has closed for the receipt of applying for this position. It is going to be a field agent position. We currently have 4, and this will be our 5th. And the position is going to be shadowing our other 4 specialist field agents for quite a while until they get the lay of the land and then are able to go out on their own. The 5th field agent will certainly be coming to these meetings as well to get a broader understanding of agriculture in Vermont.
Okay, is that it?
That's it.
Okay, any questions for any of the updates from the board members? Okay, not seeing any. Gene, are you ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I share my slides?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. Let me try to get a slide presentation here. That's weird. No, I don't want that. Sorry. Okay. Can you just see it in that small form?
Yes,
Well,
Okay.
we can see your title slide.
we can see your slides.
Yeah, I think we can see
Okay,
it.
but is it big or is it small? Because on my screen it's kind of small.
It's big, but now we just got to reload. Is that for me or for you? Yep, that was for me, sorry.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, then.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Good deal. All right. Well, I will go ahead and start then. Well, again, thanks so much, Morgan and Steve, for having me and giving me the opportunity to present on state neonicotinoid use laws and regulations. So I'm going to start off just giving a quick overview of the federal regulation of neonicotinoids, insecticides, and treated seeds. Then I'm going to hop into kind of the broader state neonic use laws and regulations. Then I'm going to kind of bore in on state treated seed laws and regulations. Then I'll touch on some of the pending neonic treated seed legislation that's out there. There are at least 2 states that there's some pretty significant legislation that's worth discussing. So I'll wrap up with that. So with that,
Hey,
let me just,
Gene?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, Gene, before you, you know, I know who you are very well, but you might, just for the benefit of other folks, just sort of explain what your current role is, so.
Okay.
Put
Sure.
the presentation in context.
Yep. So I'm Gene Harrington. I'm the Senior Director of State Government Affairs for Agriculture and Environment for the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. So we represent the ag biotechnology sector as well as the energy sector and biopharma companies. I do exclusively agriculture and environment work. So some of our member companies are member companies that produce genetically engineered seed, genetically engineered animals like GE salmon. So those is just a example of our members. And previous to that, I did state government affairs work for the National Pest Management Association. So do have some background in pesticide regulation as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Well, let me dive into just kind of broad federal regulation of neonicotinoids. So just starting off, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, which is not kind of the general federal legislation that governs pesticide use and registration, essentially requires that all pesticides be subject to a rigorous U.S. EPA conducted registration process that looks at human health, environmental risk, as well as ecological risk as well. So through that process, EPA has to conduct separate assessments looking at human health, ecological, as well as environmental risk. So including possible risks posed to water, soil, animals, including endangered species. So under FIFRA, EPA is also required to reevaluate or go through what's called a registration review process every 15 years to ensure that all pesticide products on the market are subject to the latest scientific review and the most up-to-date information, just to ensure that the registration is as scientific valid as possible. So neonicotinoid insecticides are actually presently going through a registration review. It's been a multi-year process that's been going on for a while. It's anticipated that when this is wrapped up in 2024, there will be additional mitigation measures, and that could range from lowering the application rate to spreading out the frequency of applications, to even more limitations such as restricting the use for a crop or in other environments like residential areas or things like that. We'll just have to see how the registration review process plays out, but it has been going on for a while. The agency has been accepting comments at various periods, but they're moving toward the end of the process. And like I said, they're expected to wrap up in 2024. Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just, sorry, I'm reading ahead a little bit, but on the slide there, you say the EPA requested registrants implement a national stewardship program.
Yep,
Is that
that was
something that's in the interim decision or something that's in effect now?
Yeah, I think it was in the interim documents that they were talking about just a stewardship program.
Has that been organized or is it still?
I think that's still being worked on, and will probably be fleshed out more as the process wraps up.
Okay, thank you.
But you do bring up a good point in that while there is this formal registration review process every 15 years, that doesn't mean the agency isn't looking at products throughout. So for instance, in 2013, EPA did add pollinator protection specific language to neonicotinoid labels. It added it, first in 2013, and I believe it updated it again in 2015. So even aside from the registration review process, they are constantly looking at ways to ensure that human health and the environment are protected as much as possible. So let me touch on something that I think is kind of important for this presentation. And there's a few reasons it's important. First of all, just the way it applies to other states. And also, while, I think it might explain why, Vermont is a little bit different than the other states in the country with regard to the regulation of neonicotinoid treated seed. Um, so, first off, I want to just kind of go over what's known as the treated article exemption. So, under Section 25B of FIFRA, um, treated articles such as treated seed, wooden lumber products, things like railroad ties and utility poles, as well as treated clothing, like medical products and things like that, are exempt from FIFRA registration requirements. Now, that doesn't mean that the products that are used to treat those products are not subject to FIFRA registration. That they are. So all neonicotinoid treated seeds, the neonicotinoid product does have to be registered specifically for that use. It's just that the seed itself is not registered as a pesticide. But all the insecticides that are used to treat the seed does have to be registered and has to be registered specifically for that use. And then another triggering qualification is that it essentially has to be used to protect the substance. So if it meets those two criteria, it qualifies for the treated article exemption. And this is a similar exemption that minimum risk pesticides also qualify for. It's the same section and allows for minimum risk pesticides to go to the market without meeting FIFRA registration requirements. And essentially what the broader Section 25 of FIFRA says is that those products have to essentially be of a character which is unnecessary to be subject to FIFRA. So the EPA administrator and EPA staff has to make that determination that the product is a character such that it really doesn't pose a risk. So, folks may be familiar with the minimum risk pesticide program. So some of the pesticides that qualify for that are things like mint oil, citric acid, garlic, things like that. Now, the reason Vermont is a little bit different than other states is in 2016, Vermont became the first and only state to authorize the regulation of treated article pesticides. So the legislation that was enacted in 2016 authorized the then Pesticide Advisory Council to work in conjunction with the Secretary of Agriculture to recommend the regulation of treated article pesticides. And then when the Pesticide Advisory Council was disbanded in lieu of the Agricultural Innovation Board in 2021, those duties were shifted to the AIB. And of course, in 2022, when the additional legislation was passed, directing the AIB to work with the agency to develop BMPs for the regulation of neonic treated article seeds, that kind of took it to the next level. So it is an important distinction, kind of explaining, why Vermont is a little bit different than other states, and that'll play out throughout this presentation. You'll see that Vermont is a little ahead of the curve as far as looking to regulate neonic treated seeds. So let me just touch on a recent challenge to the treated article exemption. So in September of last year, EPA responded to a 27 petition that had asked them to regulate treated seed in general, in particular, a neonicotinoid treated seed. In rejecting that petition, the agency essentially said that they already do, fully review the pesticide that's being used to treat the seed or whatever treated article, may be in question. And that those assessments do specifically look at the actual use of the product. So in the case of the seed, when they're doing the evaluation or registration review, they're not only looking at the pesticide treatment, but they're looking at the use of the treated article. So while they did reject the petition, they did also say that they will be working with states and other folks to develop an issue notice of proposed rulemaking in the future to seek additional information on pesticide seed treatments, and also to possibly issue a rule pursuant to FIFRA to regulate pesticide treated seed. In their minds, they think that could be a more efficient and less resource intensive way to address some of the concerns that were raised in the petition. So the agency is also looking, as they go through the registration review process, at labeling instructions for pesticides registered for seed treatment, as well as how the seed is being distributed and used. So there could be, and probably will be, some mitigation measures that are included in the final registration review documents with regard to using neonicotinoid treated seed. So we'll have to see how that plays out, but they certainly seem to indicate that that may be the case. So let me switch to another federal law that also governs the labeling of treated seed, and that's the Federal Seed Act. And this law is administered by the United States Department of Agriculture. And under this law, there are certain labeling requirements for treated seed. So if a manufacturer is going to sell treated seed, they do have to make certain things clear. They have to indicate what product is used to treat the seed. So either the trade name or the technical name of the active ingredient. And in addition to that, they also have to have instructions making clear that you can't use for food, feed, and oil purposes. And there's a number of states that have very similar or identical language in their state laws or regulations. And I think Vermont may be one of those states. So it's fairly common for states who have also enacted the Federal Seed Act requirement in their statutes and rule and regulations. And then the last federal law that I want to touch on, or requirement I want to touch on, is a requirement under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration requires that treated seed be colored just to distinguish it from non-treated seed, and make sure that users are aware that it's treated. So with that, let me hop to the state stuff. Before I go there, just want to see if there's any questions on just kind of the federal framework that neonicotinoid insecticides and treated seed are subject to.
Any questions? Anybody raise their hand?
Nobody online, no.
Okay, well, let me hop then real quickly to state laws. And first I'm going to start off just running through all the various state neonicotinoid use and application laws and regulations. So the purposes of this presentation, I'm really going to focus on the laws that pertain to use. I'm not going to cover laws that have established pollinator protection committees or have directed state environmental agencies to do their own risk assessments. I may touch on that a little bit as I go through, but I'm really going to focus really on the laws and rules that pertain to the use of neonic insecticides. So with that, let me start off in Oregon. So in 2015, in response to a 2013 bee kill incident that happened in a Portland suburb, the Oregon Department of Agriculture adopted a rulemaking that essentially prohibits the application of neonicotinoid insecticides to linden and basswood trees. Now, since they've adopted that regulation, that there has been some research, some of it conflicting on whether the linden trees are naturally toxic to some bees. Some research suggests that it might be. Some research says otherwise. Some people have theorized that perhaps there's a synergistic effect between the neonic insecticides and the linden and basswood trees. But nevertheless, Oregon adopted this rulemaking in 2015. And as you'll see, a few other states have followed suit with what Oregon did in 2015. So in 2016, Maryland and Connecticut became the first states to adopt laws restricting the use of neonicotinoid insecticides. So I'll start off with Maryland first. So the Maryland law essentially restricts the residential or consumer use of neonicotinoid insecticides. It does not apply to farmers or other agriculture uses or treated seed. And then in Connecticut, they designated or required the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to designate neonic insecticides as a restricted use pesticide. And similar to Oregon, they also prohibited the application of neonic insecticides to basswood and linden trees. And I'll get into this later, but I do want to touch on it now. Connecticut did become the first state to pass neonic treated seed specific law. It directed its Department of Agriculture, working with Connecticut Experiment Station, to develop some BMPs for the use of neonic insecticide treated seed. Now I'll touch on this a little more when I kind of bore in on the neonic treated seed specific laws. But certainly the dust was the primary concern in passing the Connecticut law, and I'll touch on that a little more as I get to that point. But that was certainly the primary consideration in enacting that Connecticut law in 2016. And of course, Vermont in 2019 passed legislation requiring the Secretary of Agriculture to require neonic insecticides be approved as restricted use pesticides. Now, that 2019 law did expressly carve out treated article seed. But again, as I mentioned earlier, Vermont does have the authority to regulate treated article seed, under the 2016 law. So it is an issue that has already been addressed somewhat in Vermont. So in 2021, Maine passed a bill essentially directing the Maine Board of Pesticide Control to adopt rulemaking prohibiting the use of neonicotinoid insecticides in residential settings. It does have some exemptions for commercial applicators, but it's a fairly strict law in that it very much limits the use of neonicotinoid insecticides in residential settings. It does not apply to treated seed, however. And then, of course, in 2022, the legislature in Vermont passed legislation requiring the Secretary of Ag working with the AIB to develop rulemaking establishing BMPs for the use of neonic treated seeds. And then, of course, it also required a report to the legislature on non-neonic treated seeds. And of course, you all sent that report to the legislature this past February. So more recent laws and rules. Massachusetts, in February of 2021, the Massachusetts Pesticide Board Subcommittee essentially adopted a regulation that reclassified neonic insecticides as restricted use pesticides for the purpose of residential applications. This rulemaking did not impact agricultural treatments or treated seed, but it does impact all residential uses in the state of Massachusetts. They are now subject to the restricted use classification, now can only be purchased by certified applicators and used by certified applicators. And then similar to what Massachusetts did, New York adopted rulemaking in 2022 that essentially said in early 2023 that neonic insecticides would be classified as restricted use, and that actually includes seed treatment. So it doesn't include the seed, but it does include the seed treatment. So if somebody is purchasing a neonic insecticide to treat seed, they have to be a certified applicator, and we've also got to be a certified applicator or someone operating under the direct supervision of a certified applicator in order to make that particular application. And then 2022, late 2022, excuse me, in early 2022, Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey signed legislation into law directing DEP to initially classify neonic insecticides as restricted use. But then starting in October of this year, the law restricts the use of those products even further, greatly limiting non-agricultural applications. So in addition to the RUP classification, starting in October, neonic insecticides will be even less used in New Jersey, at least in non-agricultural settings. This particular law does not affect agricultural applications, and it does expressly exempt any application to protect agricultural seed. And then also in 2022, Rhode Island passed legislation that's effective in January of 2024 that classifies neonic insecticides as restricted use, and it severely limits their use in outdoor settings. But similar to the New Jersey law, the Rhode Island law also expressly exempts treated seed. And the last law I want to cover on this slide is Colorado just passed legislation that was signed into law by Governor Polis that will direct the Department of Agriculture starting on January 1st, 2024, to essentially make neonic insecticides limited use insecticides. So under that classification in Colorado, they're only going to be able to be sold by licensed dealers and used by licensed applicators. Now, the Department of Agriculture has interpreted the legislation to not apply to treated seed in Colorado, largely because of the treated seed exemption at the federal level. And then the last legislation I want to touch on is legislation that actually just passed the Minnesota legislature in the last couple days. It hasn't been signed by the governor yet, but I'm almost sure it will be because these provisions are in a large environment and natural resources funding bill. So I'm almost certain that Governor Walz will sign this bill into law in the next couple days. So it does a handful of things with regard to neonicotinoid insecticides, as well as treated seed. So the first thing that it does is it will prohibit the use of neonicotinoid insecticides in wildlife management areas, state parks, and other state lands. It will prohibit use of neonics. It also directs the Department of Agriculture to develop consumer guidance with regard to the proper use and disposal of treated seed. And it further mandates retailers that are selling treated seed to make those that information available at their retail locations, or at the very least post information regarding to the handling and storage and disposal of treated seed. And then it also includes language that kind of parrots pesticide labels prohibiting a person from using or storing treated seed or disposing of treated seed in a manner that could jeopardize the environment or human health. And then lastly, it authorizes certain cities to limit the residential use of neonicotinoid insecticides. So before I hop to the next slide, which kind of really examines the neonic specific laws and regulations, just want to stop there and see if there's any questions on the broader legislation.
Yeah, hey, Jay, this is Steve. Anything going on in Pennsylvania? You heard of any
Pennsylvania?
Yeah, rulemaking or legislation in Pennsylvania?
Not that I'm aware of. There's a few other states I'll touch on this toward the tail end of the presentation. There are a handful of states where there are bills that are moving, but at this point I'm unaware that Pennsylvania is one of them.
I'm just curious because it's such a large agricultural state, a lot of the same issues. I'm just curious if it's been raised there or been in the, in consideration. And then also, I don't know, you may be talking about this later, but the New York legislation that's being passed. Are you going to talk about the status of that later? Or?
Oh yeah. So there's 4 states that I'll kind of dive into with regard to pending legislation, because those 4 have the best chance of passing, and 2 of those, one being New York, specifically cover treated seeds.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks.
I have a question, Gene. This is Morgan. Can you just go back to the Minnesota one for 2 seconds?
Yep.
All of those.
So all those provisions are in one essentially funding package.
Okay, so like I guess I was going with like 5 right now. It's just like I'm taking notes for the meeting, and I'm just for 5. So can a city, can that be applicable to a treated seed or no?
No. So agricultural uses are exempted.
Okay.
And I should note, this applies to only first-class cities, which in Minnesota is like a handful of cities, St. Paul, Minneapolis, maybe Rochester, Duluth. So there'll be a handful of cities that will have the ability to restrict the residential use of neonicotinoid insecticides, but agricultural treatments are exempted.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I apologize for not emailing this to you earlier, but can I just email it to you and Steve, and you can get it out to the full group?
Yeah.
Yep, and we'll save it, and it will be posted on the website too with the meeting material. So that'll be perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So as soon as I'm done, I'll just email it to you, and you can go ahead and post it or whatever.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So, any other questions?
I don't see any.
Okay. All right. So let me start diving in a little more closely or deeper to the two jurisdictions that have, in addition to Vermont, that have done something specific to neonic treated seeds. So, as I noted earlier, Connecticut passed legislation that was a little bit broader, but it included specific provision that directed the Department of Agriculture to work with the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station to develop BMPs that touched on a number of things, including use and disposal. Oop, that happened. Sorry about that. And as you can see in the bill language, certainly one of the primary concerns was the dust that can sometimes be created when the seeds are being planted. Now, over the last 10 years, there have been a number of strides made by equipment manufacturers, the seed manufacturers, to try to mitigate that issue. I think there's going to be presenters later, talking about that, planners and things like that. So, I'll defer to them on all of the specifics. But over the last 10 years, that's certainly an issue that, both planter equipment manufacturers, as well as the seed manufacturers have tried to address as far as their formulation and coding and things like that. And I included the BMPs in a link, so when I send it to Morgan, it'll be easy to access. And then the next state I want to touch on is New York. So New York's rulemaking specifically classifies the treatment of the seed. So an applicator applying a neonic to a seed as a restricted use application. So it is subject to the product being purchased by a certified commercial applicator, as well as used by a certified commercial applicator, or to the extent that New York laws allows it under the direct supervision of a certified applicator. I do not believe, however, it applies to the planting of a seed. So it doesn't make the seed a restricted use pesticide. It just makes this treated seed application a restricted use application. So, yep. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just for clarification, the products that are used to treat the seed are separate registrations than the products, the other neonicotinoid, like foliar applications, soil treatments, that kind of thing. Is that correct?
I know some of them are. I do know some of them are, because if you look at the New York RUP list, they are, very specific seed treatment products. As far as every product, I don't know that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I don't know if some manufacturers, have multiple use products, and treated seed is just one of them. It does appear, though, from New York's RUP list, that some products are just for the sole purpose of treating the seed.
Okay, thanks.
So let me touch on Minnesota, because I do think Minnesota is instructive for what you're doing in Vermont. So in May of 2019, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture did issue BMPs for the use of insecticide treated seeds. Now, I do want to touch on some other things that MDA has done as well. So in 2013, MDA began a kind of a comprehensive review of neonic insecticides. So that included, looking at treated seeds as well. And based on the review that they initiated in 2013, the MDA did issue a report in August of 2016. Now, MDA did recommend to the legislature that the legislature pass legislation authorizing MDA to regulate treated seed. To date, the legislature has not done that. They've certainly considered such legislation, but they have not done that as of yet. But certainly, the whole neonic use issue has been one that has been closely examined in Minnesota. Not just residential applications, but certainly treated seed as well. So that is certainly a state that has looked at the issue very closely over the years. And then the next state that I want to touch on, and I didn't want to get too deeply in every state that directed their state lead agency to develop a report on neonic insecticide use. But the main reason I bring up this particular report from Washington State is because the legislation that passed directing Washington State Department of Agriculture to issue a report to the Washington legislature did specifically touch on neonic treated seed. So specifically, the Washington legislature passed legislation in the spring of 2021. And then in December of that year, WSDA did issue a report in compliance with the legislation. So they looked at a number of things. They looked at the cases of bee deaths in Washington State. And based on their research and examination, they were not able to find any bee deaths related to neonic applications or treated seed mints in the last 7 years. And then in their recommendations, which they made a series of to the legislature, none of those recommendations touch on neonic treated seed. And then, as Steve alluded to earlier, there are some states that are seriously considering bills related to neonic treated seed, as well as broader bills that are focused, more on residential or non-agricultural applications. So let me touch on the treated seed bills first. So probably the two most significant bills that fall in those buckets are bills in California and New York. So the New York bill is specific to neonic treated seed, and that would essentially ban the use of those seeds starting in January 1st, 2026. So that particular bill has passed the Assembly, but it hasn't passed the Senate as of yet. New York adjourns on June 8th. So, we will know the outcome of that bill in the next couple weeks. The California bill is a bit broader. It certainly would cover neonic treated seeds, but it covers treated seed in general. And that would essentially give regulatory authority to Cal EPA or Cal DPR, excuse me, California Department of Pesticide Regulation, to develop regulations with regard to the use of treated seed. So that bill is set to hit the Assembly floor probably this week. California's session goes pretty late. They go into late August. So probably not going to know the outcome of that bill anytime soon, but it certainly is moving, and it could pass by the end of their session in late August. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. And then the other bills I wanted to touch on, Nevada and Connecticut are also seriously considering bills related to neonicotinoid use. Those bills don't cover agricultural use or treated seed. The Nevada bill would greatly limit non-agricultural applications, and the Connecticut bill would essentially tighten their 2016 law and make non-agricultural applications, even more difficult. So those two bills definitely have a chance to pass. The Nevada bill is on the Senate floor calendar, and they end, I want to say June 5th. It's already passed the Assembly, so it appears to have a pretty good chance of passing. And the Connecticut bill seems to have broad support. They don't end till I think June 7th. So we'll have to see how that plays out, but it certainly does have a legitimate chance of passing the Connecticut legislature. And then the last thing I want to touch on is just a California specific issue. So similar to what happened at the federal level, the California Department of Pesticide Regulation did reject a petition asking them to regulate neonic treated seeds. They rejected that in the fall of 2020. In early 2023 or in February of this year, they were sued for not regulating neonic treated seed. And in addition, Cal DPR is also engaged in rulemaking to more closely regulate, how and when neonics can be used in non-ag settings. But that rulemaking does not cover treated seed, and they cite within the proposed rulemaking notice, why they chose not to include neonic treated seed in that particular rulemaking. So that was all I had prepared. Happy to answer any questions if folks have any.
Do any of the members online have any questions for Jean? Or anybody else?
Gene, that was really good. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
thank you.
Very thorough, and that's a good overview of what other states have done or are doing. Can you, when you send the PowerPoint, can you send the bill numbers for the ones that are pending in New York, California, so we could dig those up? Save us a little time trying to sort out their websites.
Yeah, no, I can do that. And I would just add one thing, that this presentation just covered laws and rules, but I would note, that there are some states, I don't have an exact number, that do restrict the use of neonic insecticides or treated seed on lands that they manage. So an example is the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources on land that's being farmed. It does not allow neonic insecticides or neonic treated seeds on DNR land that is leased for farming.
Okay.
I think, yeah, so this is like, this is a lot for me. And so in my mind, like, maybe this is something that we can do internally. Like, I'm trying to organize in my mind the difference between some of these where it's only, it's not related to seeds, it's only related to foliar spray, and then by city and by, like, I'm picturing like a spreadsheet that would help my mind organize like the different kind of legislation that's going on, so I would understand it better. Because that was like, there were some things mixed in, right? Some agriculture, some not, and so that's where my brain is kind of like trying to put it into a box.
We can do that. I think, obviously, we haven't even started writing a report yet, but at some point, when we write a report to the legislature, we're gonna wanna summarize what other states have done, and we can organize it in that way, and that's why this is really good information, because I think the legislature would be interested in what other states are doing.
Because I know, well, I was interested to see that the New York had some recent legislation, but then this other one is coming up. I mean, I follow it like a little bit, but I think the stuff that's pending now is different than obviously what happened before. So it's just a lot for my brain to keep organized, but very informative.
And then, Gene, one other sort of related question about the EPA ongoing assessment. I mean, obviously they'll publish whatever they publish for public comment, but are there work groups working on it, or any idea how that's going, what their process is?
I'm not exactly sure how many work groups they have going on. I mean, they have had a number of notice and comment periods where they issue, the initial risk assessments and people comment on them. I haven't reviewed the risk assessments, but I assume they're like most risk assessments where they do include, possible risk mitigation measures, and, people have been submitting comments on those. But I don't know what other, work groups they have besides just, EPA staff working on them. I assume they're collaborating with USDA. But as far as, NGO work groups, I'm not sure of that.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it's kind of a vague question on my part, so, sorry. Okay, well, that was really good. Thank you very much. And if there are no other questions, well, thank you again, and.
Yeah, thank you, Jean. Thanks.
And talk to you later.
All right. Hey,
Really
thanks for
welcome.
having me, Steve. Morgan, thank you.
Sure. All right, thanks. Okay, we're almost right on schedule too. For Jill.
I can show them right here.
Sorry, I thought, but I can. You guys don't mind doing it? This one, right? You see that? That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that there's been any significant changes. I'll send a new one for online after.
Okay.
Can everybody hear you, or?
Do you want me to move up?
I wonder if you ought to get closer. That's the speaker, the microphone, isn't it?
Yeah, there's one right in front of you too. It's kind of like a spider, like it has.
Oh,
legs,
here, do you want
but,
to,
but you can.
do you want
come
to sit
up
where
here.
I am?
No.
Is that a mic?
Yeah.
That little one is, that's the speaker.
If you can't hear me, just yell and I will try to, my diction is poor and my projection is worse.
All right, hold on, because I don't want to see this. And all right, can everyone see that?
I'm not online.
Can
Yes, I
someone
can
who's
see it.
signed
Yeah,
in, can they see?
I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead, Jill.
So, I did, as a request, I believe it was Jonathan had mentioned looking into Dr. Art Schaafsma's work on neonicotinoid treated seed and fugitive dust. So I did a bit of a dive on studies that he was involved in, or some of the people that were involved with studies that he had been lead on, had taken and worked up a little bit. The first slide, I did a bit of a review on just a brief YouTube presentation that Dr. Schaafsma did. It was an interview by a person at a seed conference, in which he basically says that dust off is primarily a machinery problem. And his opinion was that the industry has two ways to mitigate liberated dust coming from planters. His first suggestion was that air could be cleaned as it's drawn into the machinery. So the seed planter machinery has an air intake. And the second, that it could be cleaned as the air is exhausted from the machine. Or he said that the combination of these two processes could actually be applied, and these solutions could eliminate 95% of the fugitive dust issue. Once in the ground, when they're planted in the ground, the treatments tend to stay close to where the seed is planted, but the fugitive dust, so that is emitted from the planter, is subject to being redistributed. So either wind or rain or groundwater or erosion was points for his concern. And he did some experiments testing Bear Crop Science a seed lubricant agent called Fluency. And he demonstrated that the Fluency product had a greater than 95% efficiency in the lab, but when he went out in the field, that there was a 60% efficiency, and this disparity, he believed, was due to the use of vacuum seeders. And we'll go into that a little bit more after. He was questioned on the retrofit deflector units that Europe has applied. And these do slow down the air intake into the machine, so not necessarily sucking up as much dust into the intake of the machine. They don't necessarily remove it from the air. They deposit the seed treatment onto the soil surface.
The dust.
The dust,
Yeah.
yeah. So the neonicotinoid contaminated dust will get put down on the soil surface instead of blowing it out, which some people are concerned about it being blown in the air. His feeling was this still is a potential problem because that you haven't eliminated redistribution of the neonicotinoid product. It's still there and available. We can go one more, Morgan. So his ideas for, that's all right. Thank you. His ideas for consideration by the equipment manufacturers as well as the seed treatments themselves is to make those seed coatings more abrasive resistant. The theory being that the dust from the soil that you're working over comes into the machine, rubs the coating off the seed. So making that coating more abrasive resistant, adding a second coating on top to give another little jacket of protection over that, and then using both filters on the intake so that you're reducing the amount of seed or soil that gets taken into the machine, as well as that on the exhaust air of the planter so that we're cleaning the air as it goes back out into the atmosphere. Another suggestion was use of cyclone machines to clean the exhaust air prior to its release into the atmosphere. And then the last, he wasn't real thrilled about applying the dust with the use of a coulter planter.
I don't understand that last sentence.
So what they would do is the exhaust seed treatment would actually get lined into a row behind the machine, so deposited back into the
So
soil.
you're actually planting this, I see.
So they're sort of planting it as they go. So it's not necessarily around the seed, like the jacket of the seed, but it's planted into the furrow as they go along. In the next slide, Field Crop News did a little bit of a blurb, neonicotinoid contaminated dust and pollinator exposure during planting. These are the results from a study that's upcoming, but Tracy Bout was involved in this, and so here's a little bit of the Corn Dust Research Consortium did a study of seed treatments to determine the available flowering resources during corn planting around corn fields around the time of planting, to evaluate fluency agents, so that Bayer product, in reducing the neonicotinoid contaminated dust from the manifolds as their vacuum planters, not vacuum cleaners, vacuum planters are exhausting. And then they did a cooperative investigation to determine other potential routes for exposures for pollinators. They had 9 paired fields planted with conventional lubricant. So conventional lubricants used in the States tend to be talc or graphite. And then the Bayer fluency agent is a specific product that Bayer puts out. They did a pre-season monitor, and they conducted this monitoring within 2 to 3 kilometers of the study fields. So they started before the actual planting began, and then they continued from planting to week 6. And they scouted for pollen and dead bees, and they identified them and did a residue analysis on anything that they found. And they also were trying to evaluate what types of pollen were available to the pollinators at the time of planting. We can go ahead one more. So they determined that the pollinators had available to them willows, maples, Rosaceae family. So that's the hawthorn and apples, as well as dandelions, but the dandelions were only a small portion of what was collected by this study. But these pollen resources reflect those identified in 2 other state university studies. Iowa State and Ohio State University both did studies, and they found the same availability to their pollinators as well. So they did try to capture the neonicotinoid dust along the field edge with towers, and they also were looking at off-site dust as well, figuring that the heavier particles would get distributed closer to the field, and then the lighter particles would be available for movement off-field site. And they established a correlation between the neonicotinoid dust escaping from the actual seed planters and the downwind levels found on dandelions, suggesting that planters have a direct effect on what is found in and on the flowering resources downwind. There was also suggestion that other residue exposures might be standing water, the soil at the top 5 centimeters of the soil surface, and then in dry dust layer being stirred up by the actual movement of the equipment through the field. And then some inversion corn pollen at passing. These were alternate routes of exposure, and they captured neonicotinoid residue, but at several magnitudes lower than those that they actually found escaping from the planter. So these are kind of minor players in the picture. This research basically made them conclude that they needed to reduce the amount of dust overall.
Is that published somewhere?
This study?
Yeah, this is Field Crop News is
Yes.
journalism. but
Yeah,
I'm wondering if
there's
a paper,
there is a paper. This is
peer-reviewed paper.
this is a summary of a peer-reviewed paper. So I have that paper.
Do you have the value?
Yeah, in the next one, but
Okay.
you can find this in April 2016's Field Crop News, I believe. It's cited online too. And there's a link in the top of the PowerPoint. So here's what growers can do to mitigate dust drift at planting. This is another Field Crop News. Their suggestions.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Sorry, one more. Yeah. So again, this is Tracy Baute. So the previous study that was described was one that she participated in, and this is another summary from her through Field Crop News, basically suggesting that growers can use the fluency agent to reduce dust and stay away from the talc or graphite, which they felt added an extra layer of abrasion onto the treatment. They can adapt their equipment to direct exhaust air from the planter fan downward to the ground. Again, we'll talk about that a little later. That's still leaving it subject for redistribution. They're suggesting good practices to alert beekeepers in your area prior to you planting and allowing them time to relocate their hives. And then adapting conservation tillage practices to limit the loss of soil, which has those neonicotinoid residues in it. Following IPMs and using only treated seed when indicated. And then before planting, control the actual blooming weeds around your fields and in your fields so that reduces the pollinators' attraction to your field. Also suggested final additional steps might be to do a seed coat and to filter the air taken by seed planters. Again, eliminating the dust from entering in as well as the exhaust dust from being extruded out of the machine. Okay. So this is a study there. This is a peer-reviewed study on pollinator or quantifying neonicotinoid residue escaping from planters during maize planting. And the reason for this study was that the combination of pneumatic planters, so those vacuum planters, plus the near universal use of neonicotinoid treated maize seeds with the concerns about acute bee mortality led to this questioning as to what the role pneumatic planters has in contaminated seed exhaust during the planting process. So researchers noted ahead of time that in reviewing prior to their study, a German study reported emissions from pneumatic planters with neonic treated seeds about 4% of the applied dose. So between 3 and 4 grams of active ingredient were found per hectare. And then an Italian study reported ranges of 0.43 to 1.53 grams per hectare, or about a half to 1.85% of the actual seed treatment applied to the maize. And then North America, again, we use that talc and graphite typically added to the seed box to help lubricate the seed as it moves through the planting equipment. And this also acts as an abrasive when it comes in contact with that seed. So the friction liberating some of that treatment off of it. Possible routes of release for that neonicotinoid treatment on the seed include the actual planting process, routine cleaning of the equipment after it's been used to plant neonic seeds. And then a notation that the conditions during planting, so a dry, windy day when they're out planting may actually enhance that spread of fugitive dust. And they're suggesting that a reduced rate of the fan airflow might, by 30%, may reduce dust emission by more than 80%. So as we move forward, this is that short review. One more slide, please, Morgan. This short review that Tracy Boute had made appears to tie into this. They did 9 Ontario operators, and then in 2014, they tried to retain those same cooperators, but because of the mandated crop rotation set up in Ontario, they retained only a portion of them and only got a couple new participants. So they only had 10 fields enrolled that next year. They did do random soil sampling before planting, and they used an ATV to plow through the fields to be planted, and they matched up planting speeds so that they could sort of standardize all the tests on all the field sizes were standardized to 100-meter distance and that was what considered a single planter row. They had dust sticky traps again to capture some of that seed treatment liberated close to the field. And then they standardized the time of collection that these were out for all the fields. And they analyzed the samples for clothianidins, thiamethoxam, and atrazine. And if we can go one more, Morgan. Sorry.
Right, it's really hard to take notes and do this.
I can sit close to the button. The neonicotinoid residues and dust generated by planting maize with pneumatic planters, average loss was about 0.05 grams per hectare. So 95% of this was a seed treatment residue, with only about 4.2% from the actual soil itself. So in soils that had been previously planted with neonicotinoid seed, there is a little bit of a retention in the soil. The treatment rate of the seed, so how much treatment was actually applied to the seed, this reflects that about 0.21% was lost. In the 2014 study, a mean recovery of 0.43 or 0.44 almost of seed applied neonicotinoids were collected via the exhaust filter bag. There's a note here that there's a previous study that recovered 10-fold more, but they used a commercial car air filter, and what was actually used in this was a vacuum cleaner bag over the exhaust, so that there may be a difference between the type of filter as well as the types of planters. But Dr. Shasma's study used planters, treatments, and lubricants that were used in the Great Lakes region of North America. So sort of they're looking at what we're looking at is the same thing. And so total neonicotinoid residues in the dust plume average about 0.1 microgram per cubic meter. This is greater than the previous reports and exhausts from 5 meters from the outlet planter fans. And research determined that 95% of the neonicotinoid residues released during planting with pneumatic planters came directly from the seeds themselves, while the remainder was from the disturbed field soils. They suggest there is a need to mitigate release of neonicotinoid dust from the soil dust containing neonicotinoid residues from previous applications from entering the vacuum planter. So again, that intake, the dry dust entering into that seed chamber where the seed's actually getting abraded, and then any added talc causing abrasion onto that seed coating itself. And moving on, they're suggesting the following steps to improve dust reduction. So suggesting that manufacturers develop coatings to improve the adherence of the active ingredient to the actual seed, reducing abrasion from either the talc or surface dust from entering the vacuum air stream, from removing the active ingredient from the planter exhaust, so filtering the exhaust air, and then adopting conservation tillage practices to sort of reduce the overall soil disturbance before, during, and after the planting with neonicotinoid seeds. And they felt their results show that well over 95% of the exposure to non-target organisms, so anybody that is not in the ground with the seed, originates from the exhaust during planting. One more. So here's a little bit more of a dive on another paper that Dr. Shaftsmith published, the role of field dust and pesticide drift when pesticide maize seeds are planted with vacuum type planters. So again, a lot of this is a redo of the previous stuff because these were all tied in together as far as I could tell. But when he tested the fluency for Bayer Crop Science, he observed that the field levels of fugitive contaminated dust were greater than laboratory. And so this is where he came with that hypothesis that it was the seed being abraded by field dust that caused the problem. And he notes that several other researchers, so Nuytens, excuse me if I didn't pronounce your name, use of deflectors does help reduce wind speed and redirect the emissions from the planter, but it, while it might reduce the drift by 30 to 70%, it's still depositing it on the soil surface. So again, it's still leaving it for redistribution depending on weather events, erosion, etc. Another outfit studied the use of the cyclone apparatus and using that to actually apply them into the soil furrow. And their feeling was that while it did lead to nearly 100% recapture, the drawback was that the cyclone system was very capital intensive. So it was quite costly and it probably was not within a budget of a normal farmer. Bianca also came up with a less capital intensive option, which was to use a filtering recirculating system that produced near 85% efficiency in reducing the fugitive dust emission. But this was causing them to need to replace filters potentially. And then what do you do with spent filters with the neonicotinoid contaminant in it? So there's other drawbacks there. So earlier research had focused on the seed treatment dust emanating from seed to seed contact, but Dr. Shaftsmith's belief was that the abrasion of the seed is actually enhanced with the exposure to the field dust and the lubricants that have been traditionally used. And the next objectives of this study were to characterize the role of the field dust, quantify the amount of dust involved in the contamination, and to determine what extent the dust could be practically mitigated. And then another side one was to talk about whether the addition of surrogate dust to testing method, the ESA HUBAC protocol, would increase the resolution of testing for anti-abrasive properties of seed coatings. So that ESA HUBAC protocol, from what I gather, and there might be smarter people out in our audience that could help me out, is testing the seeds themselves to see how well the coating adheres onto them. And they sort of run them through a system and they capture whatever is emitted off the seed. But what Dr. Shasma felt was that there should be a test. So in his test, they actually used a sort of pseudo soil. They used diatomaceous earth, put it into this testing mechanism so that the seed actually was being abraded by something similar to dust, but it was a standardized size, so that they could see how well seed treatments adhere. So something that the manufacturers could do to perfect their coatings. And again, the details are pretty much the same in this. I won't go into the equipment, but they used a standard piece of equipment. They also applied the seed in a standard rate to all seeds in the testing. And they had, when they tested it in the dust meter to evaluate the efficacy of the treatment on the seed in the lab, they used a Flow-Right product that's available publicly. There was a product X that was used, and then that product X was a one coating and then a second coat over the seed treatment when it was nearly dry. So they used 3 batches. One was Flow-Right, one was product X, one was product X, and then an extra overcoat over product X. And so if we move along, again, these were air samples collected in 2014 to 2016. You know, essentially what they had done, it was affixed vacuum cleaner bags on all the vents in the seed metering units, and on hopper box lids, they sealed the tubing. And they drew air into the planter with a special pipe that they had put above the equipment, so about 4 meters, and through an added filter. And the goal was to not necessarily reduce the air intake into the machine, so not change too much of what was going on, but to see changing direction. And then, so the seeds were dressed for the field portion in an additional polymer coated, and the Fluency product was used at the labeled rate. And so if we can skip 2, Morgan. So they measured that field dust entering the vacuum system had a positive effect on the total amount of clethoanidin captured in the filter bags. And that there was a strong positive linear relationship in the lab between the amounts of fine dust, which they used diatomaceous earth, added with the seeds, and the amount of the treatment recovered in the filters. So comparing seed lots, so they did use 2 separate seed lots, some previous studies, and they're out there. I can't tell you what they are. I've looked at some of them from other countries where they were saying that different seed lots shed treatment at different rates. So there's no main or interactive effects attributed to seed lot in the lab when the seed lots and polymer treatments were compared using dust recovered as a parameter. For seed treatments where there was no dust added, the protocol shows that there was no effect attributable to the seed lot polymer used or their interaction. So there was, however, an interaction between the polymer treatment and the dust added. When product X was double applied, there was slightly less dust recovered overall. So having that extra coating in the face of being abraded did provide some level of reduction in neonic release. And their feeling was the mean reduction in fugitive clethoanidin seed was approximately 98% when they employed various mitigation strategies and found that that's a tactic that they promoted, basically, is not just one, but multiple strategies. And we can go one more, Morgan, thank you. Field dust entering the planters is abrasive to seed treatments and increases the amount of treatment via exhaust. About 12.6% of the active ingredient is lost in the worst case scenario and 2.6 as an average. There had been some previous work that had recovered different amounts, but they also said that there were some differences that the John Deere planters, compared to the planters they were using, had a lower negative pressure, used less air volume, and had a slower air speed. And they didn't readily lend themselves to seals when they were using the filter bags. So the Kinsey planters that were used had a much higher power system. They got a more seed abrasion, but they also lent themselves better to a tighter fit with the vacuum planter bags as opposed to the John Deere planters. So it's just a matter of difference of equipment. They found that residues bound on soil from applications from previous years also contributed a portion. So again, in that short study, we said that 4.2% of what's being exhausted by the machine was probably coming from that previous year's treatment. And then there are 3 cases of residue escapes greater than 3 grams per hectare and 1 exceeding 4 grams. And that suggests that the amount of active ingredient escaped the vacuum planters is greater than they've originally believed and proportional to the amount of field dust entering the system. But they also point to certain characteristics such as the soil texture and the availability, so the type of tillage that was used or the soil moisture, and the dust may worsen in certain situations. Again, similar results were found when they were using a stationary planter in the lab. Amount of dust recovered was 80% of what was applied. And that as the amount of dust entering the system increased, the concentration of the clethoanidin decreased, suggesting that at a certain point there's a saturation where they're, adding more dust is not going to change the result. This phenomena was repeated again when they're comparing their measurements to field studies. So the clethoanidin declined logarithmically as they recovered more dust than the planter exhaust. And then noting again that dust meter testing system that they were introducing is accurate and precise under the conditions that it was meant to operate. They feel that that system underestimates the risk of contaminated dust risk because it doesn't take into account the dust from the field. So that's why they're proposing using a pseudo dust that might simulate that seed being exposed to field dust and planting. And then we probably go through 2 more, Morgan. The goal of mitigating pesticide drift during planters is goal of mitigating pesticide drift during planting with vacuum planters by greater than 90%, 95% is realistic and achievable in their estimation. But they suggest that filtering the exhaust air was the main contributing factor to this 98% reduction in the fugitive clethoanidin achieved. I'm losing my voice here and my mind. So they're suggesting a combination of the strategies be deployed in tandem to achieve the goal of curtailing pesticide drift during planting. And so again, using clean air to go into the seed or the planter, scrubbing the exhaust air as it goes out, and then improving the actual treatment polymers on the seed and how well that they are adhered, any sort of neonics are adhered to the seed. So that we're doing two things. We're, one, not taking it off the seed to begin with, and then others either not exposing it into the atmosphere or leaving it on the soil surface where it can be redistributed. And that is what I have read.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a question. So most of these studies are a few years old, or 5 years or so. Has there been anything recent, do you know?
I haven't seen anything. I've been working with our state library and then doing a lot of Google Scholar searches. And there's not a whole lot. I think Dr. Shasma and Dr. Vaute could probably tell us more clearly what might be in the States. Some of the things that I have printed out for my next batch of stuff are more in the line of reductions through IPM.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And some of that is old and some of it is not so old.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Say Ryan has a question.
I think I had a same question along those same lines. Since these studies have been out for a couple of years, I wonder if we have a sense of if some of these strategies are already being adopted, and if not, what might be limiting that?
I think I had a brief exchange with Heather. It might be worth seeing what she's found, because I think Heather Darby has done quite a bit of searching to find how to employ some of these, and I don't know, to be honest. I haven't seen a whole lot when I've sort of poked around to see what, if anything, from the manufacturers is out there.
Yeah, I think that's a question we're going to put on for future, or for a subsequent meeting. That specific question is, have these ideas been implemented? And in particular, how are they being implemented in Vermont? You know, so that would be something that we need to find out is.
So Heather's on
Okay.
right now, and she was going to kind of touch upon her own experience trying to source a kit and things like that. So I don't know, Heather, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Yeah, I'm up at the research farm, so yeah, I was gonna just provide an update on what is happening with all the projects that we had started to implement, and then also talk about or follow up on some of the items that were just discussed a little bit. So I don't have any slides to share. I didn't have enough time to put anything together, but I can talk about thus far what we've been doing. So all of our on-farm studies have been planted with treated corn versus untreated corn, with the exception of one site that will hopefully be planted this week. So those sites have corn that we were able to secure that didn't have any neonics on it, but still had fungicide seed treatment. And then we purchased the same variety that was fully treated. So that has been put out onto farms. Prior to planting, we did put out wireworm bait traps, which is one of the pests that the neonics is being used to control. So we put out bait traps 2 weeks prior to planting so that we could see what the wireworm pressure was at the different sites. And those were all removed before planting, and we calculated the number of wireworms, etc. And then we've also put out seed corn maggot fly sticky traps to basically look at seed corn maggot populations and flights, which is it's been interesting. A lot of the corn around the state has been put in the ground. The last week was a great week. The week before that was pretty good too. And then the weather continues, at least in most parts of the state, to look very dry. So most of all the corn should be planted, really in the next week. But I would say last week was a really big week for people to plant corn. And I would say for many farms, a lot of that work is done. And on the 2 research sites, we have also started the planting date study. So we're planting corn at different dates to see treated and untreated, and monitoring the seed corn maggot populations or flights to look at corn damage. And I'm not 100% certain, but I think the peak flight was actually earlier last week, at least in the islands, at least in Alberg. We have sticky traps out in Addison County, and we have some up in Franklin County where it's a bit colder. And but I would say definitely at our traps here at the research farm, the end of the first week of May, there were 250 seed corn maggot flies on the traps. And then at the very end of last week, there were 85. And then I just checked them today, and that number will probably be cut in half again this week. So at least in the somewhat warmer parts of Vermont, the peak flight did seem to be timed near where most of the farmers actually were planting. But we'll see again, because we are planting corn every week to basically look at damage across time, and we'll see what happens. Some of the first corn we planted is starting to come out of the ground now, so we'll be scouting that corn probably at the end of next week, once it gets a little bit bigger, to look at losses from the seed corn maggot in the treated and untreated seed, and also out at the farm sites. We've also been collecting soil. We've collected 2 sets of soil samples so far. We collected a baseline sample before the corn was planted, and we measured that, sampled that to 2 depths to get sort of background possible residues. And then we sampled again the 2 research sites just after planting. In both cases, roughly about 4 or 5 days after planting. And then we're planning to sample, sample again throughout the season. As far as water samples, we have collected very few, and part of that is because we haven't really gotten any rain. So we did manage to get a couple of samples after planting, but not as many as we had hoped, because we haven't, like I said, we haven't had any rainfall really up here. Yeah, so those are the trials. The projects are mostly in the ground, and we're doing the monitoring. As far as planters and activities that were happening prior to this work and prior to, just prior or currently, as I mentioned the last time we spoke, this really hasn't been a major, I would say, educational topic in the farming community. So the practices that were mentioned earlier about, dust management on planters, some of the fluency, sort of amendments that can be applied to the seed potentially to reduce dust, etc. I mean, I'll be honest, I think farmers largely have no idea, you know? And we started talking with some of the farmer groups a month ago about basically making planner modifications, and people were really interested and excited about it. It's something they didn't really know about, didn't realize that they could do. And so that I think the interest is there, but it's really getting, you know, some options, some realistic, practical options into their hands. You know, many of the planters are pneumatic planters out there. You know, sort of my rough estimate is probably 60 to 70% now of the planters operate in that way. So, you know, it is in some ways relatively low hanging fruit if we can come up with some, again, you know, sort of practical, realistic systems that we can help farmers obtain and install. And so what I was talking to Morgan about was that our plan at this point is to install a couple different systems on our UVM planters. We have 2 pneumatic planters. Actually, we have 3 of different sizes and scales, and working on that over the summer so that we can highlight that at our summer field day here in Alberg, and then also use that as learning for us to be able to guide farmers in, you know, making those modifications themselves, kind of what's working, what's not, you know, just even bringing it up in conversation quickly with the farmers at a couple of the watershed meetings. You know, there were a lot of questions that came up about management of those systems. Some of the things that were already talked about. Well, what do we do once we have all, you know, these cartridges, et cetera? So I think there's a lot of interest, especially given the results that can be obtained in you know, putting this into practice. But you know, we have some legwork to do on for the farmers, I think, to really help them come up with those practical you know, solutions. So we're working on that, like I said, and the literature review was really helpful. I would agree, there doesn't seem to have been much done. It feels like there was a big push, you know, especially when Ontario put their rules into place. And since then, it doesn't appear that there's been a whole lot of research. So I think we can really help start moving this forward and be an example, certainly for, you know, other places as well. We also have not found a kit. We kind of thought that, especially in Canada, that there would already be aftermarket kits, or, you know, the companies would have kits that the farmers could buy, but that doesn't seem to be the case. It was alluded to in a few articles, but we never found anything. So we are going to have to, you know, really fabricate our own things. And, you know, different brands of planters are different. So that will pose, I don't want to say some challenges, but it certainly may. We have 3 different types of planters at UVM. We have a John Deere, a White, and a Monosum. So I think it's a good range of, you know, the different planters that farmers also have. So I think that's at least our next step in education and outreach.
Thank you, Heather.
That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Heather, this is Steve. If board members wanted to come out and see your research and see what you're doing, when would be a good time to, you know, not have it as a regular part of the meeting, but have a day where members come out and we can look at what you're doing and how it's going?
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about this with Morgan a little bit. It will be a big part of our annual field day. So people are definitely welcome to come to that. That'll be on July 27th. We cover a lot of topics, but that will be a special focus in the afternoon that we'll spend a lot of time on. So that's a date that's already set. Outside of that, we're certainly welcome, you're welcome to come up as a group and see what's happening. The research is happening at different locations. And visually, there's
Not much
with the sticky, yeah, there's, I mean, it would be kind of boring, really. I think,
Watching grass
right.
grow.
I mean, yeah, it's the conversations, I mean, we'll start scouting the corn here again, like I said, in about a week. And then after that, things won't really look much different,
Yeah.
But I think I would say coming to the field day and having the board interact with the farming community and hearing feedback and really understanding challenges, opportunities, hearing the questions, I think that would be really, really great for the board. As well as the farmers, to really understand what's happening. They're hearing it now, right? They're just hearing about the new rules that are going into place. So there are definitely a lot of questions, but for the majority of farms, it's a very, very new topic. So the education needs to get out there, and that's what we're hoping to really focus on.
Okay, well, we can certainly, make sure all the board members are aware of the field day and all that. And, make that a point of emphasis. When is our meeting in July anyway?
It's the Monday of that week,
Okay,
the 24th, right? I think.
okay, and the field day is on what, Thursday?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have an opportunity to talk about it then a couple more times. Yeah.
But, and I would say you're definitely welcome to come up at any time. Not that I'm trying to not have you come up. You're certainly welcome. I think mostly I just need to know a date and I can let you know if it works for us, but.
Okay, well, we'll talk about it. But I think the 27th makes a lot of sense.
I have one
Yeah.
logistics question, Heather. Do you have to register for the field day, or can you just come? Do we need to have people?
Well, it would be nice to get a list of people that are coming. Yes, we do have registration because we have a big lunch and everything, so we need to know who's coming for lunch, more or less.
Yep.
Yeah,
I feel like I haven't readily seen that. Is that on your lab page to register?
To be on our conference workshop. I can send it to you if you don't see it there.
Okay.
It's on the
I'll look
website under workshops and conferences. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
But yeah, I mean,
thank
I
you
felt like UVM needs to set the example of having their planner dust-free first so that we can be able to show that it's feasible and doable and what it costs and where we got the parts and all those kind of things. So. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I have a question.
Okay.
Heather, when you reached out to manufacturers, did they have any idea what you were talking about when you called John Deere and said, hey, I'm looking for this? Did anybody? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, most of what we saw too was Syngenta was, helping with these kits up in Canada. And so we tried to reach out to them. It was, we weren't reaching out in Canada. We were reaching out to the Syngenta folks we know here in, the region. But people were largely oblivious. So it's not, people aren't talking about it.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
enlightening.
So.
Any more questions for Heather before we let her go back to her busy day? So thank you for taking the time, Heather.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Have a
Looks like
great
I don't see-
afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. You too, Heather.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Okay, so pretty much right on time.
Yep.
Let's check in with do any of the board members have any questions or comments at this point? Pretty much a packed meeting here.
Yeah, so what's next
Work plan status.
is what's next, yeah. One thing I just wanted to ask the board members that are here, I didn't ask at the beginning, I didn't hear any changes to the minutes that were sent out, but does anybody have any? I can't see chat, are people chatting?
I don't think we, oh, Clarice had her hand up.
Hi, yeah, this is Clarice. I did send a note on
Oh,
page
you did.
7. Yep.
And I think I fixed that one. You did do that, sorry.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for reminding me, Claire.
Okay.
Okay, so then what's coming up? Excuse me, it's gonna be a little disjointed. So we have, if we go chronologically, we have quite a few people that are available to speak to the board in June and July. So in June, the person, Tracy Bowdy, that Jill kind of summarized some of her work, is going to come and talk to us. So she works for the Ontario, I forget what that acronym stands for, but basically Ministry of Agriculture, Food, something, something.
Right.
But that's a
Something as bad as ours.
that is, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that was something that was asked for by the board, so I think it's great. We'll touch on, she has a lot of, we have some of her research was included in that initial lit review that was pointed out and proposed by members. So she's coming for sure. The other group that we know is coming for sure is Pioneer Seed representatives from Corteva. That is we got a preview of this type of kind of logistics of treated seed. So how to get at the question of the availability of treated seed, that's on our work plan. So the two men that we met with at Bordeaux Brothers are going to speak in June with us about that. And then we've also asked, we've been working a little bit with having another Corteva representative come in to talk a little bit about the economic benefits and efficiency of seed treatment. So that's another one of our topics. And so right now we're trying to combine those two because it's Corteva, so we're trying to have those together. I don't have a name yet for that combination, so I'm going to continue to work on that for June. And then the second part of addressing that economic impact of seed treatment, we have Elson Shields, who is retired now. He was an entomologist from Cornell, and he has a paper that was also in our kind of lit review shared reference list. So it's about specifically seed corn maggot and stand losses and the need for insecticide seed treatment. So it's about his, I think, 2-year study at Cornell addressing the economics and use of neonic treated seeds for seed corn maggot. So those are people that are set up for June. July, we have one more entomologist. So we have John Tooker. Again, a lot of his research was in our lit review, and he is his research is about, he's going to talk to us about how IPM principles can or cannot be melded with the use of neonicotinoid seeds? Like, can we have both? Can we say we can use IPM with how neonicotinoid seeds works? And he will call out Pennsylvania as is slightly different. It's not as easy a comparison to Vermont ag in Pennsylvania as maybe Cornell is a slightly better direct comparison. Pennsylvania has some differences. He called out that they're mostly no-till in Pennsylvania, and so he was saying he believes that's different for Vermont, but he'll talk more about that. So then the other big one that we have is, so we have Emily Bergeron coming in July from Crop Life Canada, and she's going to specifically address neonic seed treatment requirements in Ontario and Quebec with us. And so that is going to get out, we heard almost a year ago exactly today about Ontario's requirements, and so this will be kind of an update to that presentation, but also include, we haven't heard to date about Quebec's requirements for use of neonic treated seeds. So we have that lined up for July. And then we have another potential presenter, which I'm not sure we need to double up, in Louis Robert, who's a retired Ministry of Ag, Fisheries and Food soil agronomist from Quebec. And so he was going to touch on that too. That was before we got Emily Bergeron. So we might be able to either combine them or have him available for questions. And so that's there. So the one question, we want to make sure this Emily Bergeron has questions. If we have specific questions that we would like her to address about the Ontario and Quebec requirements. So we started a list, and where did I put that list here? So, and we wanted to specifically ask the board for more questions. And if you can't think of them right now, that's fine, but maybe I'll send an email and we'll have a deadline for get me the questions.
We have a discussion at the June meeting too.
Yeah, maybe by the June meeting, yeah. So some questions that we have on the list right now to be addressed by Crop Life Canada representative is, has there been a change in usage of neonic treated seeds since requirements were enacted? Are farmers following the requirements in order to get the neonic treated seeds, or are they just planting untreated, or are they not planting anything? What products made by what manufacturers are registered as alternatives to neonics as seed treatment? What diamides products are registered? So those are the questions we have right now. Does anyone have one off the top of their head right now that you'd like me to add? You can speak up. If not, we'll have this as an action item for talk about in June, so we can get these questions to that, to Emily Bergeron.
And also, Steve, I'd also just mention that, if there's an item of information or area that you think is important for the board to think about or hear about, let us know. We'll try to get a speaker or get some information about it. Or if there's somebody that you think could make a presentation to the board relative to this topic that you think the board ought to hear from, just let us know. We'll see what we can do. I also think the next 2 to 3 meetings are going to be fairly information dense. There's going to be a lot of information, and then we're going to have a period of time to just sort of digest it all. Maybe have a couple of meetings with just discussions about everything we've heard. We will let everybody know, make sure you are able to get the arrangements you need to get to the field day.
Yep.
Heather's field day. I think that's going to be important. But anyway, we're kind of, heading into the meat of the topic, I think, over the next few meetings, so.
Yep, and I have one more update. So I did have a meeting at the end of last week with some representatives from Health Canada's PMRA, which is basically the equivalent of the EPA in Canada, and about basically the federal level. So exactly what Jean's presentation started with today, started with federal and then went to state. So we're getting the provincial requirements through CropLife Canada. So then asking for kind of that federal umbrella. And what they gave me, and it was really informative, is basically their websites where it spells out even this is why we did it. We had B incidences. This is what happened. So, and exactly, Jill had it on a slide as well of basically some of Tracy Bowdy's research and the fluency dust mitigating agent that led to BMPs that are requirements for language on seed tag labels. So they said it's all on our website, and so I guess our options as a board is I can make a presentation from the board, and they're willing for me, like I can make a presentation summarizing it, get it fact checked by them just to make sure, and then I can present it to the board. Or I could share all the resources that they gave to me and the board can look and read, and we can come back with specific questions that I might be able to then ask them. But they, didn't jump at the opportunity to come. So those are kind of our options. Either we.
Well, let's
do
get
our
the
homework,
information and we'll try to summarize it.
so I can summarize,
Yeah.
yes, that's fine. So that was kind of my plan, is I'll summarize it, and they're happy. They did offer, if we thought it was necessary, they could be available for questions.
Okay, well, let's see how, if we do have questions after this summary.
Yep. But I can pull, I did have, just because it was so relevant to Jill's presentation today, so the BMPs, like the requirements that came out of some of that research led to these requirements. So this is PMRA, so Pest Management Regulatory Agency for Health Canada. And so this labeling is on the label. So like when turning on the planter, don't have it so that the dust is in contact with honeybee colonies. And so all of these things is requirement, they can only use this, they're not allowed to use talc, and graphite are not permitted. So this is some of that, but just because it was so relevant to what you were exactly saying. So this is what is available and is what is on the label that gets put on the tags of the bags.
Okay. So that's the federal.
That's federal.
Okay, that'll be part of your federal summary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Anybody, any of the board members have any comments or questions or topics they think bring up while we're talking about the work plan? I'm going to throw out a topic which we'll need to think about a little bit. I think we know Stephen, but we heard from the Vermont beekeepers about the stuff they've looked at with the impacts. I've also I think there's some research available. I've seen some, and we need to sort of organize it. Is on the mitigating effects of non-pesticide treated forage in landscapes where you have both. You have pesticide treated crops that the bees are feeding on or foraging on, pollinators are foraging on. Then you also have non-pesticide treated forage. And there's some research, which I think we'll need to delve into and maybe find someone to talk about is how does that work?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, just sort of having a diverse landscape of pollen sources versus, you know, one particular type of exposure. So that's something we can do internally unless somebody on the board has a source they want to give us. But we'll sort of try to build that into okay, we good, Morgan?
Yep, and I think I'm gonna just to look at, while we're looking at this work plan, so I think I'm gonna delete a field trip and
Yeah.
push, so then we're gonna push the field day, which is
Yeah,
12/27.
Right, that makes more sense, more efficient.
Yep. And we don't need to make Heather do another research update. Like that, but maybe.
Okay. So probably in June and July, we can flesh out, see where we're at, and then flesh out the meetings in August and September.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't think I had any other things that I had to talk about in this. We do have one action item to
Okay.
double check with council on our end about the wording of that
Oh, yeah,
last topic.
right.
So I know that's on my action item. I
Okay.
just, yeah, we were waiting for
Okay.
session. So that's for the, I'm referring to the last topic for the criteria for a system of approval of neonic treated article seeds, of kind of just the interpretation of that and
There's a responsibility for the board.
Yeah.
To discharge, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, the next topic on the agenda, the relevant 2023 legislative bills, we can take off the agenda now.
Yeah, I left it one last time in case anything snuck in the last 2 weeks of the session after our last meeting.
Yeah, but as far as I know, there's nothing. And now we're open for public comments. That would be glad to hear from any of the folks who aren't on the board who participate in the meeting, if they have anything they want to add to the record.
Oh, I see Wendy Sue as a chat. How about, has there been an impact to farmers under the new rules?
That'd be
Oh,
the question.
for Ontario.
Yeah, yeah.
Got
yeah.
it, Wendy Sue. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, that being, not hearing any public comments, we can go ahead and adjourn. And we'll reconvene on the 26th of June. And yeah, as always, stay in touch with Morgan if you have any questions, or need any information, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody in a month. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.